I come from Argentina, and that's one of the blessings and the curses that I've had throughout my life. When I was about 16 years old, the word consciousness was not part of my normal vocabulary. I wasn't even very interested in all these things. But I was living in a country that was in the midst of the most incredible denial that anybody could imagine. In 1976, there was a coup, and at the surface, everything was going wonderful. I went to school, life was normal. In fact, most of the terrorist attacks that had been standard fare in the newspapers before were not happening anymore. So life was good. And I lived like that for about 4 years. Now, in 1980, a lot of stories started to come out about what had happened in these 4 years. It was horrifying. Now that time is called the time of the Dirty War. It was a time of concentration camps. It was a time where about 30,000 people disappeared. It was a time when all sorts of atrocities took place, but everything was happening under the surface. Nobody talked about it. There was no news. I lived thinking life is good. So it was an incredible shock when I realized that I had been in the midst of this small Holocaust, totally unconscious. And not only I was unconscious, but a whole society was unconscious of what was happening. And I would say at that point, I realized that the word consciousness, paying attention, knowing what's going on, is not just something for spiritually enlightened people, but it's something that makes a huge difference in a person's life, in a group's life, in a company's life, in a society's life. And I started paying attention to that word. I started paying attention to what does it mean to live fully aware of what's around you. I had another opportunity to see the dangers of unconsciousness. And this was in 1982. Same military government, perhaps in an effort to avoid all the attention that people were paying to the internal struggles, decided to start a little war. Some of you might remember the Falklands War, Argentina against Great Britain. The Argentinians said that the islands belonged to them, and they took them over. Now, this was a very strange war because most of the time the news was that the British fleet was coming. They had to sail from Europe, so all across the Atlantic Ocean, it took a long time for them to arrive. So most of the news was that they were coming. And then when they arrived, as in every war, the first casualty is truth. So inside Argentina, we were getting fed a ton of information that we were winning. It was fantastic. We were in the best of all possible worlds. And we kept hearing on the radio and the TV and the newspapers, we're winning, we're winning, we're winning. Now, I can't remember the exact date, but it was almost funny if it hadn't been so tragic. Because in the morning, we heard, we're winning, we're winning, we're winning. And then around 3 p.m., there was a very short communique from the government saying, we lost. So it was like, we're winning, we're winning, we're winning, we lost. And it was an incredible shock because everybody believed that we were really winning. And I was surprised about myself because even though I knew it wasn't true, perhaps because I wanted to believe, I also fell into this unconscious space of thinking, yeah, we are winning. And then suddenly I was shocked with the news that we lost. Now, you might think that this happens only in South American countries with military dictatorships. Unfortunately, that has not been my experience. I've been living in the United States for about 10 years, and from the moment I arrived, I realized that unconsciousness is not private property of South America. The desire to live thinking that reality is what it's not, or denying some of the basic facts that surround people are not something that only happens outside of the United States or in politically challenged countries. My experience first in Berkeley, where I got a PhD in economics, and then in MIT, but mostly working with large companies, was that unconsciousness is rampant, that it's so seductive to invent a dream world and then live there, that people are absolutely shocked and stunned when reality interrupts the dream and shows its face. In fact, this story about the Falklands War has become like a war story in GM, General Motors, a company I work with extensively, and this notion that many campaigns in GM have demonstrated this dynamic: we're winning, we're winning, we're winning, oops, we lost. And that is something that happens so often, and everybody knows that that's happening, and yet people seem trapped in the dream. So what I would like to discuss with you and to invite you to consider is what are some of the challenges and some of the opportunities of living with full awareness, not just as a spiritual exercise, but as a business exercise, as a discipline to be fully present with whatever is happening in my business, with my employees, with my...
Para seguir escuchando este audiolibro gratuitamente, haz clic en el enlace de la descripción y podrás escucharlo completo sin coste gracias a la prueba de 30 días de Audible.